ruling to restage a vote in Istanbul causes an international backlash. We debate why sending people back to the polls has caused so much controversy. I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is the rerun of Istanbul's mayoral election. Turkey's commercial capital is a city of more than 15 million people who are politically divided, and we have the numbers to prove it. In the March 31st race for mayor, the opposition candidate Ekrem İmamoğlu beat former Prime Minister Binali Yildirim by a mere 14,000 votes. But the ruling AK Party challenged that result, and Turkey's Supreme Election Council ruled the vote for mayor needs to be redone because some ballots were unsigned and some ballot box officials were not civil servants. So, are we seeing law and democracy in action, or a ruling party that can't admit defeat? Haider Abbasi has more.
Istanbul's mayoral election was disputed from the start. On the night of March 31st, the ruling AK Party's candidate Binali Yildirim was first to declare victory. That was soon followed by his rival, Ekrem İmamoğlu, of the Republican People's Party. After all the votes were counted, it was İmamoğlu who won. But his margin of victory was narrow, just 13,000 votes.
Bir şüphe ortaya çıkıyor.
There is doubt, and there is clearly election fraud here. The only authority that can end this doubt, this unlawfulness, and this controversy is the Supreme Election Committee. Therefore, we've prepared all the documents and brought them here. We filed our appeal to the Supreme Election Committee to annul and rerun the election.
In the end, İmamoğlu was Istanbul's mayor for less than a month. Turkey's Supreme Election Committee has ordered a rerun of the mayoral election. The committee has found some election staff weren't civil servants, as well as other irregularities. İmamoğlu says he won't boycott the vote, which will take place on June 23rd.
Demokrasimize büyük bir darbe vurulmuştur.
This is a big blow to our democracy. We have to repair this together. Of course, we have reactions to this process, but as I said, our leader will explain this process to our people. Let us say this to our people and to the residents of Istanbul. Everything is going to be all right.
Recep Tayyip Erdogan was mayor of Istanbul in the 1990s, and parties connected to him have run the city ever since. Winning here is the greatest prize for any political party. It's the biggest city and the economic heart of Turkey. But the decision to rerun the election has provoked strong feelings. Many came out to protest on the day the rerun decision was announced. Some demonstrators claim İmamoğlu has been robbed of his victory.
Yapılan bir seçim var, halkın iradesi var.
The election was held and the people made up their mind. Disrespecting the will of the people will alienate us from the rule of law. Despite all that, we still have confidence in the law.
Anur Erim worked on the AK Party's campaign. I asked him if annulling this election result could be seen as violating the rule of law in Turkey.
The approach that AK Party does not, recognize the rule of law when it comes to the point if AK Party loses, I do definitely not accept. And the evidence in hand definitely refuses this kind of approach.
There's been an international outcry against Turkey's electoral authority. Germany and France have both expressed concern, as has the United States. Erdogan's Justice and Development Party has governed the nation since 2003. Will the rerun be a bellwether for the party's popularity? Is this a legal ruling with purely local implications, or a sign of a bigger issue? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Well, I'm joined now in the studio by senior ruling AK Party member and former Turkish Minister of EU Affairs, Egemen Baş, and the Deputy Chairman of Turkey's opposition Republican People's Party, or CHP, Ünal Çeviköz. Gentlemen, pleasure having you both here on the Newsmakers. Egemen Baş, let me start with you. Something that I'd love to get clarity on from the AK Party's perspective. When you look at that election and the dispute over it, do you believe it was mishandled in the counting, or that it was actually physically rigged in favor of the opposition?
There were some cases in some areas where rigging took place. There were some places mishandling took place. There were irregularities and discrepancies in some other places. So you cannot pinpoint all of the problems to one issue. What happened was the night of the election board first announced that the difference was 28,000 votes around the first night. But when some of the districts were recounted, the difference came down to 13,000. I personally would have preferred if they had recounted all of the votes of March 31st and declared the winner. Even one difference would have been enough, but at least it would have been fair. But we saw that in some areas, AK Parti's votes were registered to CHP column. In some areas, CHP's votes were registered to Vatan Partisi column. In some areas, other parties' votes were mismanaged. But the main reason that we are now facing a re-election is more than 20,000 election workers of the total 62,000, so 1/3 of them were illegally appointed because there was a law passed in 2018 which requires the chairman and at least one member of the election committee at each ballot box to be a public servant.
To be public. So you cast
and
doubt
they were
over
not.
them. Okay. So you cast doubt over them. Oh, just before I get a response from Ünal Çeviköz, why do you think they rigged it, or rather, who did the rigging?
I cannot pinpoint any individual or any group, but whoever would benefit from this might have an involvement in the rigging or in the re-reporting or in the way things were taken out of hand. We saw, for example, in some areas, some of our applications were rejected.
Okay.
But for example, in the district of Büyükçekmece, you could see 150 voters registered to the same address, which is technically impossible. And unfortunately, no one made a fuss about it. And when we applied for that to be fixed, we were told it was too late.
Okay. We've got it laid out by Egemen Baş. They believe it was a combination of both, Ünal Çeviköz, because that's why the Supreme Electoral Board had no choice but to call for a re-election on the mayoral vote. That's the perspective from AK Party. Tell me why you disagree.
Well, I'm inclined to disagree because the ballot committees have been assigned by the government, and it is the Ministry of the Interior, Ministry of Justice, and they have the prerogative to choose and assign all the representatives of each and every ballot box committee. That is the reason why I think we should trust, first of all, to the members of the ballot boxes. Secondly, I think we have to wait and see the result of the justified decision by the High Election Board, because the High Election Board has only given a decision, but there is no justification of it. And I am seriously concerned because in the public there is a widespread discussion going on to give some kind of a direction to this justification. The justification of the decision is very important. And once we see the justification of the decision, then we will understand what the real motive behind the decision for the rerun is. Thirdly, I think there is one envelope and there are 3 ballot tickets in that. And the other 2 tickets, which are for the district mayoralty and also for the municipality council, are valid, but only for the metropolitan mayor are not valid.
Okay, so let's
This is something which is quite disputable.
Let's ask Egemen. So Egemen, one piece of paper, why are you okay with some of the results on that paper and not other results? It's the same person in charge of the same paper.
First of all, I'm inclined to correct a statement of Ambassador Çeviköz when he said the government appointed the committee members, which is not really correct. The government oversaw, but we have an independent National Election Committee, which has branches.
100%.
Well, once they are appointed, yes, they are independent. And we realize that at the city levels and at the district levels, most of the decision makers are judges, and these judges are senior judges. They're about to retire, and they have made some choices in accordance with their political views. This is my assumption. But coming to why some part of the election was okay and the other part has to be renewed. There are two reasons for that. One, AK Party and MHP applied for the mayor elections of the greater Istanbul city to be repeated. Then there were no applications made for every district. And the National Election Committee could only decide based on the applications that come before them.
But aren't those in doubt
There
as
were
well?
some districts where we wanted the election to be redone in Büyükçekmece. MHP asked Maltepe to be repeated, and our applications were refused. Secondly, the total number of votes that are in question, that include some kind of a doubt, has to exceed the difference. So there are 42,000 votes which cannot be decided or have a lot of doubt according to National Election Board. And the total difference in the election of the mayor for Istanbul was 13,000. So that number could have shifted the result, could have changed the result. That is why they decided to redo the elections. But at the district level, the differences were either not enough to make a change.
So even if the votes went completely the other way, they wouldn't make the change?
They wouldn't make the difference. And there were no applications. I mean, with all due respect, CHP did not apply to have all the districts
They've made another point, retrospectively.
to be renewed until the decision about the Istanbul municipality came about. And yesterday they applied to renew the elections in all of the districts. And we have to wait for the decision of the National Election Board.
They've made another point.
They might as well accept that application or not.
Looking into the past, they've made another point. They've said that if you're hanging a big question mark over these elections, then what about the referendum? What about the presidential elections? What about everything that preceded it? Because it was the same process. Your brief response to that before I bring in the ambassador.
The difference would not change the result. The presidential elections, their own candidate, presidential candidate, announced that night through a journalist that the guy won. And he sent an SMS, which was aired, so he accepted. But in this instance, the candidates for both alliances, both the People's Alliance and the opposition, both candidates announced their victory that night. Both Mr. İmamoğlu and Mr. Yıldırım announced that they won because it was so closely contended.
Ambassador Çevikos, June 23rd is coming along. If you feel confident that you won the last time around, and there'll be tremendous scrutiny this time on fairness, on who's looking after the ballots, who's in charge, who's overseeing, you must be confident that you'll win again. So what's the big deal?
What's the big deal? Because it is the right of Ekrem İmamoğlu. He is the mayor. He is the elected mayor. He has
self-proclaimed.
No, he's not self-proclaimed.
He is self-proclaimed.
He has received his election certificate on the 17th of April, and he has been in duty for the last 3 weeks. But because of the objections and the appeal made by the AKP, the High Election Board has decided that we should go to a rerun. First of all, the decision of the High Election Board is not based on legal concepts or legal justification. It is a political decision, and the political decision is so obvious because Recep Tayyip Erdogan, 3 days before the decision was made a very strong statement and asked for the renewal of the elections. So that shows that actually when an election in Turkey is not won by AKP or by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, then there's a pattern of rerun. Because we have seen this in 2015. On the 7th of June, there was not a majority of the AKP in the parliament, and they asked for a rerun, and we went to a rerun on the 1st of November. And that is what exactly Recep Tayyip Erdogan said last week. He said, we did it once in 2015, we will do it again.
Okay, so let's get a response from Egemen.
Totally
so it's the
mixing
president picking up the phone
oranges.
saying rerun it, not the
president did not pick up any phone, but Speaker of the main opposition party, CHP, publicly threatened members of the National Election Board that they would be prosecuted with treason if they had decided to renew the elections. So political pressure, yes, but from the opposition to the National Election Board. But the members, and this was a 7-4 vote, so it's not even that close, decided legally that because of the discrepancies, because of the mishandlings, because of the way it was carried out. And they also announced that they will take legal actions. They will ask prosecutors to look into the matter where these mishandlings took place to see if any criminal activity took place or not. But comparing this election to the presidential election or to the parliamentary elections, which was not renewed, by the way, the reason parliamentary elections took place last time is because a coalition could not be established, an independent cabinet was formed for a certain period, and for the lack of a government, a new election had to take place according to our constitution.
Egemen, okay.
But it forms a pattern. It forms a pattern.
Okay, so you believe there's a pattern. Okay.
If CHP had established a coalition with AK Party, and the AK Party leader at that time really wanted to establish, but they couldn't agree on the terms.
Okay, I want to move forward from 2015. I want to ask about
mixing
money.
apples and oranges, with all due respect.
A lot of people talking about money. The CHP has mentioned money. Independent analysts have mentioned money. We have Ezgi Basharan, the Turkey program coordinator at Oxford University St. Antony's College, telling Politico, Istanbul municipality, for example, has been funding all sorts of foundations that are AKP run. The municipality has also attended to award lucrative infrastructure contracts to AKP-friendly businessmen. There's a $7.5 billion budget. So the idea is, okay, maybe AKP is all right with Ankara going to the opposition, but with Istanbul, there's just too much money at stake. That's why we have to fight to the very end.
That's totally irrelevant.
Tell me why.
First of all, most of these allegations are not true. Second, AK Party is in charge of executing the government, the central government of Turkey, till 2023. So money is not the issue because AK Party has the national treasury, which has a much bigger budget than any other municipality. And we did accept losing in places like Antalya, Adana, Mersin, even the capital, Ankara, and we did not make a fuss. Democratically, they won, and we respected that.
Okay.
But their candidate in Istanbul did not win because if all the, even less than half of the ballots were recounted, and the difference dropped from 28,000 to 13,000. If all of the ballots had been recounted, probably our candidate, Mr. Yildirim, would have publicly been declared the winner.
Let me ask
they interfered and they refused and they applied. They used their legal rights to prevent that. And that could not take place. So the only other option for us was to apply for a re-election. And we applied for that. And we had the 3 luggage full of documentation proving the irregularities, proving the discrepancies, proving the mishandlings, proving all the rigging. And they had to take this legal election, legal decision. And now they will announce with the justification of their decision all the details, and we will all find out.
Ambassador Çevikos, did money have anything to do with this?
There's a very strong feeling and there's a very strong perception that the budget of Istanbul is very dear for AKP. It is so obvious because Istanbul population is about 1/5 of the Turkish population. And it also shows that the budget of Istanbul is the main dynamo or the locomotive of the Turkish economy and industry. And that's the reason why this big budget is very dear to the governing party. And that's the reason why Recep Tayyip Erdogan, before the elections, said that if we lose Istanbul, then we lose Turkey. That's what he said. And that's the reason why it is very difficult now to accept and to digest the defeat. That's the reason why AKP has produced several arguments based on legal cases, but all the legal arguments and objections and the appeals have been refused by the High Election Board. The only last one was very political, and the political pressure put on the High Election Board has unfortunately resulted with the decision of the High Election Board. And now we are going to see the justified decision. And I am, again, I want to underline this. In the public, there is a discussion and people are showing the way how this justification is going to be written to the members of the High Election Board.
Let me ask you, Ambassador Çevikos, when that day comes around, June 23rd, and if Binali Yildirim wins, would you accept that?
Certainly, this is the result of the normal elections, free and fair elections, as it has happened in this one on the 31st of March. But that is not an option for us. It is not an option because İmamoğlu is embraced by the people of Istanbul. Not only by the people of Istanbul, we are receiving support calls from all over Turkey and all over the world. And that is also, in a way, demonstrating that İmamoğlu is very much appreciated. And
but if it's a free and fair election on June 23rd, would you accept it?
If it is a free and fair election, İmamoğlu is going to win it.
Egemen?
Well, people have a right to change their minds, first of all. People will determine who to vote for according to what happens in the next 40, 50 days. Let's see what kind of action İmamoğlu will take, what kind of statements, what kind of activities he will do. I have to give the guy credit. He did much better than we thought, but I think he lost the election with a small margin. But then, because of these riggings, it appeared as if he had won. Now that there will be an election, it is going to be much more transparent because all the political parties will have very close monitoring of every single action.
And the eyes of the world as well.
And the eyes of the world.
Because they're questioning Turkey's democracy.
From all around the world.
How do you feel about, as a former, sorry to interrupt you, as both of you former representatives of the state to the world, how do you feel about the fact that the world looks at the first run being annulled and the call for the rerun and saying maybe Turkish democracy is flaky?
I feel very sorry.
Well,
I feel very sorry that because we are giving that kind of a perception that this country is unfortunately withering away from the rule of law. And that is the perception which is unfortunately prevailing all over the world. And this is something which makes me quite sorry.
I agree. And those who are responsible for giving that kind of a perception, who rigged the elections, who put the numbers in different columns, and who really gave Turkey a bad image, should be prosecuted. No questions, no ifs, no buts. But when compared, the two candidates, Mr. İmamoğlu lacks the experience, and Mr. Yildirim is an achiever. He has done a lot for this country as Minister of Transportation, as Prime Minister, as Speaker of the Parliament. So people of Istanbul might realize that they need more experience and they might change and they might vote for him.
Mr. Minister, I have great respect to you, but you don't expect me to believe in that argument because Mr. İmamoğlu has been a survivor and he has been a very successful mayor in Beylikdüzü, and that is the reason why he has been the nominated candidate of the Republican People's Party.
If he is as good as you claim, then he would not have a problem winning the election.
Well, he didn't.
He didn't. We both know that the results of the elections changed overnight when we recounted some of the votes. Then you should have helped our application to recount all of the votes. We would not come to this situation.
This is a very far-fetched argument.
I mean, all the ballot boxes of March 31 are still there.
Okay. Well, enough people
seem to recount all of them. And
enough people seem to trust in the process of June 23rd. And I guess all I can say is good luck, everyone, when it comes to June 23rd. I hope we can have the discussion again after June 23rd.
Would love to.
I think this has been a really important discussion.
I disagree with Ambassador Çeviköz. I think Mr. Yildirim is going to win, as he did the first time around.
Okay.
Well, you see that we agree to disagree.
Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Egemen Bağış and Ünal Çeviköz, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Newsmakers, has the Iran nuclear deal fallen apart? We look at Tehran's decision to cut back on its commitments. And Florida fighting guns with more guns. Will arming teachers prevent school shootings? In the carrot and stick approach of global diplomacy, the Iran nuclear deal was one big carrot. Supporters said it would bring Iran into the international fold, stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons, and, most importantly, prevent all-out war. Then Donald Trump got elected. And 1 year after the White House pulled out of the pact to bring back sanctions, Tehran is threatening to escalate. It plans to enrich uranium if Europe doesn't come up with a new deal in 60 days. But what could that possibly look like? With more on this, here's Natalie Perhonen.
First, there were warnings for the US not to walk away from the Iran nuclear deal. Now there are pleas for Iran to stick with it.
ما احساس کردیم برجام نیاز به یک جراحی داره و قرص‌های مسکن یک ساله کافی نبوده. این جراحی برای نجات برجامه، نه برای نابودی برجام.
The Iranian president says his country is partially withdrawing from the agreement a year after the US dropped out. And he's issued an ultimatum to the remaining signatories, particularly the Europeans. If new terms aren't negotiated in 60 days to benefit Iranian oil and banking sectors, Tehran will resume its uranium enrichment.
We'll have to wait to see what Iran's actions actually are. They've made a number of statements about actions they threatened to do in order to get the world to jump.
Washington's decision to reinstate sanctions and extend them to countries buying Iranian oil has endangered the 2015 accord. The prospect of economic progress appears all too distant in Iran. The US is no longer party to the deal, but it is inextricably linked to it.
The US is to blame for the situation, and it makes it difficult for both Iran to fulfill its obligations made by the participants of the deal towards the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I won't hide, for the general state of the nuclear non-proliferation regime.
Unsere Botschaft ist und bleibt eindeutig.
Our message is and remains clear. Our partners and ourselves stick to the nuclear deal with no cutbacks, and we expect Iran to respect it to all its extent, also without cutbacks.
Ohne Abstriche.
The major powers have been here before. They negotiated a deal to reduce the nuclear threat. The question is, can they do it again without the US? In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action was signed by Iran and a group of countries called the P5+1. They're the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus Germany. They agreed to lift economic sanctions against Iran in return for Tehran scaling back its nuclear enrichment program. It took nearly 10 years of negotiations to get to that point. But then US presidential candidate Donald Trump promised to remove the US from the deal if he won office. And he did.
The Iran deal was one of the worst and most one-sided transactions I've ever seen drawn by anybody, ever. And I mean never. I am announcing today that the United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
The agreement still exists, but the US withdrawal has shown how influential its sanctions relief was in the first place and how fragile the pact is in its absence. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now in Prague is Golnaz Esfandiari. She's a journalist for Radio Free Europe and an Iranian analyst for Freedom House. Satara Sadeghi is a researcher of North American Studies at the University of Tehran. And lawyer Dave Jonas joins us. He worked on nuclear non-proliferation for the Pentagon under the Bush administration, and Donald Trump nominated him to be the Energy Department's legal counsel. I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Golnaz Esfandiari, in the context of the relationship between Iran and the Trump administration, has Rouhani made the right decision here?
I can't speak for Rouhani whether he made the right decision or not, but what I can say that this is a worrisome development, but it was predictable. Iran has been complying with the nuclear deal. The US left the deal exactly a year ago. The IAEA, the United Nations Nuclear Agency, has already 14 times, I believe, confirmed that Iran is fully complying with the deal, but Iran feels that it is not receiving any benefits from the deal because of the US sanctions, and also because the EU, China, Russia have not done anything significant to compensate Tehran for its losses. So the Iranian establishment decided to take this step. What is important here is that this is a mild reaction from Tehran so far. It is concerning, but it's a mild reaction. It's not, for now, it's not a violation of the nuclear deal. It could become a violation, a technical violation, depending on how much Iran will keep a low enriched uranium and heavy water. But for now, it is not. And Iran has said, President Rouhani said that Iran it wants to keep the deal alive, but it wants some kind of benefit. So, and it has, as you know, it has given an ultimatum to European countries.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a few minutes. Dave Jonas, we heard from Golnaz. She says that the Iranians have been complying, but this is worrying and predictable now because both are pushing each other here and hurtling towards something that might be dangerous. Do you agree with that?
I think it's always problematic to assert that Iran is complying with anything after 20 years of proven non-compliance prior to the deal. And that's non-compliance with legally binding agreements like the safeguards agreement that Iran has with the IAEA, which we've just discussed a moment ago. And of course, hardly complying with the spirit of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty either. All of that is highly problematic. I think that I agree with my colleague who just mentioned that it is a somewhat mild step, but it's also an interesting step. And of course, if you asked Secretary Kerry and President Obama and those negotiators, you know, would they have contemplated or approved of this kind of a move of Iran? Well, you probably won't hear anything from them because they've been saying all along that this deal should be binding and nobody should be able to escape from it or to withdraw from it, even though it is an unsigned agreement and is not legally binding, therefore making it little more than a policy commitment. So the United States withdrawal was certainly lawful. And Iran doing this, of course, you know, if it was a legally binding agreement, you can't pick and choose like a Chinese menu and say, well, I'm going to observe Article 1, but not Article 2, and Article 4, but not Article 5. And essentially that to some extent is what Iran has chosen to do here.
But the Americans have taken them to the Chinese restaurant here, right? It developed in that context. The Americans a year ago said, we're eating Chinese. So the Iranians are now doing what they're doing. You'd accept that, Dave. This doesn't come out of nowhere.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
Okay.
I would accept that, and I think it's somewhat predictable.
Okay, so Sitara Sadeghi, most importantly, you're in Tehran right now. I'm curious to know whether Rouhani has the support of his people when he decides to scale back on some of these commitments. Does he?
As an Iranian, I myself and what I hear from the people, they all support because the U.S. withdrew from the deal a year ago, and the European signatories haven't done anything to stand up to the U.S., and Iran is not benefiting from the deal at all. And I should also mention that the step Iran is taking is within the framework of the JCPOA, and it's based on the Articles 26 and 36 of the deal. So we are still within the deal, unlike the U.S., who has already left and was the reason that this step came from Iran. Okay. So, yeah, I think President Rouhani has the people's support.
Okay, so Golnaz, Tehran basically telling the Europeans, you got 2 months to sort this out. The Europeans came back, they shot back metaphorically very quickly and said, we won't be blackmailed in any way and you can't give us these ultimatums. The Russians are showing support, but is Iran being isolated because initially the thinking was that the Europeans were softer on the Iranians than the Americans. So are we seeing Iran being isolated here, Golnaz?
We have to wait and see what Europe is planning to do. As you said, Russia was critical of the U.S., so was China. And in general, the European countries have a number of times criticized the U.S. for leaving the nuclear deal because they believe this is a good deal. It's not perfect, but you know, it was preventing a crisis. It was preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons because its program, it's still being inspected by the IAEA, the United Nations Nuclear Agency. What is the problem here is that the European countries have promised Iran something that I believe it's very hard to deliver. So the EU is in a very tough spot here. They don't want a confrontation with the US, and at the same time, they have promised Iran that they will do business or they will facilitate business with Iran. But, you know, that would put EU countries at the risk of sanctions. And I don't think that they want to lose the US market. So it's a very complicated situation. situation, and it's moving very fast, and it can be very dangerous.
Yeah, it is a very complicated situation. Dave Jonas, Sergei Lavrov saying this is an unacceptable situation created by the irresponsible behavior of the United States. Are you comfortable with the Iranians getting cushier with the Russians as a result of this?
Of course, it's really rich to hear Iran or Russia talking about irresponsible behavior from the United States when they're the ones supporting terrorism, invading other countries, and doing that kind of thing. I know it was unpopular, certainly with the EU and certainly with Iran, for the United States to pull out of this deal. But from a legal and a policy standpoint, it was absolutely acceptable and fully authorized by the deal itself as a mere policy commitment. So there's simply no issue there. Now, Iran loves giving ultimatums, and of course they play in a way with the same playbook that Russia does. They both love to poke the United States in the eye whenever they can and as often as they can. It's interesting that Iran is doing that to some degree with the EU here, giving them an ultimatum, because the EU, as any state might, when they make a decision, for example, to negotiate the deal and then stay in it, as the EU has done, they sort of want to back up their decision. And now Iran is even making it harder for the EU to maintain their position as a deal signatory. Excuse me, the deal wasn't signed, but as a member of the deal, right, a participant in the deal, a negotiator of the deal. And so it's very tough to say. The EU, I think my colleague just mentioned, there's multiple pressures now on the EU and multiple competing pressures. So how they come out on all of this in the end is difficult to say.
Dave, the United States sending warships and B-52 bombers to Iran's doorstep. Who's poking whom in the eye here?
The United States has indeed dispatched the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Battle Group, but that had nothing to do with this announcement of Iran's. That was done days earlier, and it was based on intelligence that the United States had that the Iranians were going to attack United States forces and/or facilities in the region. So they're really completely unrelated.
Okay, no, and I'm curious to hear from Sitara Sadeghi. Is it taken that way by the Iranians when Dave Jonas says, well, this has nothing to do with it, whether it's the listing of the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist group, or the sanctions, or pulling out of the JCPOA, or sending the aircraft carrier? When the Americans say we need to separate out these things, do the Iranians accept that?
It's very difficult to accept. First of all, the intelligence that our colleague is talking about here comes from Mossad, Israeli intelligence services, and there's no report. Like, it's only what they are talking about, but there is no substantial report on it. Second, why does it come, if it's not related, why does it come at this point when, as you said, it was announced earlier? And I also need to mention that let's talk about who is supporting terrorism and who is seeking to destabilize the Middle East. Your President Trump, announced in his election campaigns that it was the U.S. who gave rise to the ISIS in the Middle East. It was the U.S. who supported the terrorists, and it was the U.S. who delisted MEK, the terrorist group that has assassinated more than 17,000 Iranians. And they are openly supporting the terrorist group still, everywhere.
Okay.
So it's very...
Okay, so hold on. So before I bring in Golnaz, Dave, one of the things I really like about the show is it's very rare, I think, Dave, for you to have the opportunity also to have dialogue with a young Iranian from Tehran who's said something to you.
Indeed.
Here's an opportunity to respond to that. Respond to that, Dave.
Well, and I do appreciate that, and it is an unusual opportunity to have a dialogue with an Iranian. That's something that is not often available, so I very much appreciate it, and I appreciate your viewpoint. I do think that you have to recall, first of all, the United States doesn't support terrorist groups. I think what you were saying earlier is that President Trump noted in his campaign when he was a candidate that ISIS grew during Obama's watch because President Obama wasn't doing that much. And similarly, under the signed deal, when President Obama was in office, the Iranians weren't feeling any pain or difficulty because President Obama was shipping them pallets of cash. And so what's to hurt there? But in this case, where President Trump has pulled out of the deal and is vigorously and aggressively applying multiple forms of sanctions, Iran is feeling the pain. And I think that is what has led to the action of Iran, the feeling that it is necessary to do something to let America know that it is displeased. Now, make no mistake, there are back-channel communications. I've been involved in international negotiations for a number of years as an American government official, both military and civilian. And I can tell you that there are things that are said that aren't reported. I mean, we all know one of the problems with the Iranian deal was that there were all these side deals that were kept secret that we didn't even know about. So there are back-channel communications going on right now where Iran is probably saying, look, we'll stop this or we'll pull back on this uranium enrichment and possession and heavy water manufacture if you do X. Now, that might be remove these financial sanctions or remove these other sanctions. We don't know. We can only speculate. But I can assure you that there are back-channel communications going on with this.
Right. Okay, Gulnaz, as we wrap this up, the two nations are on opposite ends when it comes to multiple conflicts in the region, whether it's Syria, whether it's Yemen, whether it's the internal dynamics of Iraq or Lebanon, and so on. The US blames Iran, Iran blames the Americans. Now we have this with the nuclear deal essentially slowly being dismantled. The big question everyone has, are the two nations hurtling towards war? Is this happening right now in slow motion? Gulnaz?
I certainly hope not, but the signs are worrying. As you said, the U.S. has deployed carrier and bombers in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. says there's a threat from Iran. I don't think we can dismiss that, although the U.S. has not provided any evidence. We don't know what's the evidence. But just recently, the U.S. designated a powerful Iranian military and economic organization, the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, as a terrorist organization. And experts said that Iran could react by, attacking or threatening U.S. troops in the region. So it's very dangerous. And but I certainly hope that diplomacy will prevail, because I think a war in the region or a conflict between the two countries is not in the interest of the U.S. nor Iran. Iranians are one of the most pro-U.S. nation in that region, and the U.S. should be careful not to lose Iranians. That would be, I think, very bad.
Okay, well, I've got to wrap, but it's been really good talking to all of you. Gulnaz Esfandiari, Setaria Sadiqi, and Dave Jonas. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers.
I do not see how we can arm our teachers with only 144 hours of training and only 8 of those hours for active shooter training. How are they going to be able to execute, to be able to perform, to take down the threat when our own law enforcement can't even do it?
Last year, mass shootings happened in a record 23 U.S. schools. The state of Florida thinks the solution is to protect students with more guns. The local government has passed a law to arm teachers, and so far 25 school districts have signed up. Volunteers will undergo special training, but critics warn this won't prevent attacks like the one in the city of Parkland that killed 17 people last year. Instead, they fear it'll cause fatal accidents. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Parkland, Florida by Lori Al-Hadef, who, as we heard earlier, opposes the bill. Lori lost her 14-year-old daughter in the Parkland school shooting and has since founded the organization Make Our Schools Safe. Lori, really good to have you on the program. From the outset, let me just say that you have strong moral authority here. Your voice is extremely important. You have every right to have a strong opinion about this. But you have the governor saying, I want to prevent tragedies such as the one that took your daughter away from you by making schools safer. We'll train the teachers and we'll ensure that those massacres don't occur. Why don't you believe him?
I believe that we need to make our schools safer by creating layers and layers of protection. I believe that we need to be proactive and, for example, like more mental health services for our students, specifically starting at the elementary school level, where we have an opportunity to reach these students early to be able to get them the mental health services that they deserve. And arming our teachers is a reactive measure, and we need to be able to think of solutions to prevent the guns from getting into our schools.
Okay, I want you to have a little listen to Sheriff Noel Stephen, the Okeechobee County Sheriff. Have a listen.
We're going to arm these folks. We're going to train these folks. They are leaving this gun range higher trained than my rookie employees.
So they're saying, Laurie, that there are going to be loads of checks and balances here. They're even undergoing psychiatric evaluation, background checks, and so on, to ensure that it's a good guy with a gun who can stop the bad guy with a gun. How about both? How about you have this as a preventative measure, but we also try to address the root causes?
I think, though, unfortunately, 144 hours of training is not enough. And only 8 of those hours being of active shooter training is not enough. I don't understand it. They required 12 hours for legal information guidance and only 8 hours towards active shooter. It doesn't make any sense. In a fight or flight situation, people have to be able to react. As you saw on February 14th, we had a law enforcement officer who froze and didn't act, and he was supposedly trained. And so only giving our teachers 8 hours of active shooter training is not enough. And it's going to cost more lives because teachers, it is not in their training. This is not what they went to school to do. And 8 hours is not enough to be able to take down the threat. It's not able, they're not able to assess the situation. They're not trained. It's not enough training.
Okay, and I'm looking at the number of school districts in Florida. There seem to be 67. So 25 have agreed to participate in this program. That suggests that less than half have agreed. It means that the majority still have questions. So does that give you hope that you can push back and this can be reversed?
Listen, at the end of the day, we're creating a culture of fear by arming our teachers. And the first teacher that accidentally shoots an innocent child, then they're going to rethink this. Then they're going to think that this was not a good idea. And we need to put the guns in the hands of our law enforcement, who are the experts in this field, to be able to take down the threat.
There would be those, and this gets politicized. It's usually, it becomes a gun control debate, a right-left debate, and this is not what we're trying to do here. But I noticed on social media, in the aftermath of the recent Colorado shooting, we saw this young kid, an 18-year-old kid, go and rush the gunman, right? And he lost his life. Kendrick Castillo was the kid. He rushed the gunman, probably saved lives and sacrificed his life in the process. There are those who tend to skew right in their politics, who say, well, if there was somebody with a gun there, this kid wouldn't have lost his life. If somebody could have taken out the shooter, we wouldn't be in this situation. What's your response to that?
We have to create layers and layers of protection. We have to keep the guns out of our school through single point entry, more cameras. We need to have random searches of backpacks and screenings. We need to have more mental health services. We need to start promoting more see something, say something, send something apps like the Safer Watch app, so we can get help to these students that are crying out for help on their social media through their posts, and find those threats and take them out before the guns even get onto campus. And the other thing is that we need to arm our teachers with panic buttons to be able to activate law enforcement as quickly as possible to take down the threat. And then they will know where that threat is coming from when the teacher pushes that button. And we should not give our teachers guns.
For those who say, well, the National Rifle Association, or NRA, is extremely powerful, they fund a lot of politicians who tend to push through these bills. So you're fighting a losing cause. How do you feel about that?
Well, you know what? What we are doing currently now, the status quo is not working. So our legislators need to wake up and realize that we have to make changes to something. So we will either continue to do what we're doing and continue to have school shooting after school shooting and our loved ones dying, or we're going to wake up and we're going to start making changes to our gun laws, giving more money to mental health services, and putting more money back into our public schools for school safety and security.
Laurie Al-Hadaf, I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.